Halt and Call for Backup, episode 114. First to help, last to ask, with our guest, Chris Logan from First Responder Wellness. Welcome back to Positive Connections Radio and Halt and Call for Backup. And we have a great guest today. You guys, we have Chris Logan. He is the Director of Clinical Operations for First Responder Wellness, located in Newport Beach, California. Chris, welcome to the show, buddy.
Oh, thanks. Glad to be here, Mike. It's great to be here with you guys. I know we've talked in the past about, getting together and doing this, and it's great to finally get the opportunity to sit down and talk with you guys and catch up a little bit and talk about, what's going on and what we're doing out here to help our first responders.
Can you believe, Jim, he's finally on our show? After all this time, we finally got him.
Yeah, you and I have been talking about getting Chris Logan on this show for over a year, if not more. And listeners, if you know Chris Logan, stand by and buckle up. It's going to be a great show. If you don't know who Chris Logan is, Mike's going to talk a little bit about him in a second, introduce him fully. He is one of the badasses in recovery and counseling. He's not only just a good friend, he's also a colleague. And I had the blessing of working with him before. Mike works with him all the time. So
100% right, Jim. And Chris, hey, why don't you, and I want to tell you one thing too. I am beyond honored to be able to work with this guy. He's a good man. He helps first responders. And tell us a little bit about your journey in recovery and what led you specifically to work with the first responders, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. First off, you guys are building me up like I'm some kind of rock star. So this must be my 15 minutes of fame. So I appreciate that.
Nice.
No, it's also an honor and privilege to be here with both of you guys and to work alongside of you guys, and currently be working with you, Mike. It's such a great thing that we do, in the population that we serve. So, recovery for me started in 2006. I battled addictions from an early age. So I grew up, my mom was really young, and I bring that up a lot in some of the podcasts I've done and talking to people, because I feel like it had a real big impact on, my upbringing and how it was that I ended up, dealing with addictions of my own and stuff like that. So my mom was 16 going on 17 when I was born. And so that came with a big set of challenges for her and for myself both. And so, I won't go into too much detail about what that looked like. And, I grew up a kid in the 80s. And so, Generation X, man, and it was a different kind of life. And so, addiction started real early for me, 15, 14 years old, experimenting as early as 12 and 13 years old, but it was a different time. And so, that would take off early in my life, and it would haunt me for the next 15, plus years. And so at the age of 31, 32, somewhere around there, I made that decision. It was, with a little bit of help from outside entities.
We probably know who those are.
Local, what do I say, a nudge from the judge, and those sorts of things. So, but I took that opportunity in 2006, and I began my journey to recovery. And in 2009, I would go back to school and begin my education to become a certified drug and alcohol counselor. From there, I would go on to be an adolescent counselor for a number of years. And I've done quite a bit in the industry, everything from sober transportation, sober support, behavioral health tech work. I've done crisis, family interventions, crisis intervention. I've done just about everything there is to do, I think. And so about 2014, I was introduced to Dr. Odom, and he at that time had a program called Simple Recovery. And so I did an interview with him, and we hit it off. And so Simple Recovery was a traditional treatment center where we focused on failure to launch young adults. in, just helping those young people get up and out of their addictions and off into life. So many get stuck there and have a tendency to stay there. So we focused on them. And in that, Dr. Odom started a professionals program. So we were Simple Recovery, and we had a professionals program, and we also had like a higher end program in Malibu. And so it was Simple Recovery, which is ran out of Costa Mesa, this professionals program that was out of Santa Monica, and then a higher end treatment center out of Malibu for those folks who, live on the greater side of life and have a little bit more. So out of that professionals program, and you'll hear Dr. Odom talk about, his vision of having a first responder only program. But he was treating professionals and nurses, and that was really where we started this idea. In 2017, he came to me. I was running his Simple Recovery for him, and he said, I want to do this first responder thing. And so we sat down, put pen to paper, and began to develop the program and what we had learned so far, dealing with professionals and nurses and that sort of stuff. And we began to hire a few people in, I think it was a 2018. Is that the PSPA conference? Is that what that is?
The
In San
PSPSA, yeah.
Diego? Yeah. And so we launched it there, and we were strictly an outpatient program. And, that was a pretty amazing day. It was probably 500 or 600 first responders, and I got the opportunity to go up there and tell them what our hopes and goals were and what we had. And that's where it started. And in 2018, we were a professionals or a outpatient only program, and we started treating first responders. And I've been fortunate enough to do it ever since. So, my journey, I think, led me to being able to help people of all, shapes and sizes, so to speak, right? I don't think it really mattered at that point whether or not I had first responder experience, or or not I was a person who knew both professionally and personally what it was like to deal with and battle addiction. And so, and mental health, right? So I think that was one of the things that really kind of got me um, in a position to be able to connect with people, to truly connect with people. And that's, I mean, you guys know, you work in recovery, the deal. I mean, that's really what it's about. How can we meet people truly where they are, speak their language, connect with them, empathize with them, and educate them along the way, provide them what it is that they need, to be successful at recovery. And so, whether that's mental health or substance abuse, and so I think that's one of the things that I've been able to do well. And, having that education and, coming to the table with multiple years of personal experience provides me, I think, a level of confidence, not arrogance, right? But it's confidence that I understand what it takes to manage a life free of addiction day to day, and I can really, I think, articulate that well to other people and connect to other people. And that's really helped me successfully navigate this with this population, and um, doing that has put me in a position where, I've been able to really connect with a lot of people on a lot of different levels. And so that's really, I think, what is the biggest piece to the success of what it is that I am able to do, if that makes any sense.
It's a strong skill to have to work with first responders because there's that trust element, and even get them to walk through the door. I know first responder wellness. Some of the staff have been first responders formerly, like myself, and some haven't. But talk a little bit about cultural competence and why is this so critical for the team at FRW?
Yeah. Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head, right? It's about trust, and everything that the first responder culture is rooted in is trust, right? I mean, you're talking about men and women who have to trust the person sitting next to them literally with their lives, right? And so it's about being able to have a trust within where it is that they're going, that they're going to get what it is that they need. There's a big piece that comes with first responders reaching out for help, right? They're the first to help and the last to ask for help. And that's one of the things, we saw early on, that these men and women will struggle with their own issues, challenges, whatever those might be, as they're putting one foot in front of the other to help other people, right? And so when it comes to cultural competency, I think a lot of people feel like, oh, well, you have to be a first responder to be able to connect with these people and really understand their culture. And while that does help, it definitely gives people a level up. I think there's a lot that we do at First Responder Wellness that helps people that maybe aren't first responders to really understand the culture and be able to get in there and to help them, right? When you look at how it is that we've designed the program, one of the biggest things is the social model, right? The social aspect of what first responder wellness is. It's a treatment center that only treats first responders. So when these men and women show up, right, we're a lot of times where we get our quote unquote street cred, right, where we get a lot of credit, is that they see their people when they show up, right, and that's not necessarily within the staff, but it's within the milieu, right? Their people are there. They recognize their people and they know who they are, right? And these people are from all over the United States. And so what we've taught our staff to do is to really lean into that, right? Help them to understand that, hey, your people are here, right? One of the things I tell people all the time is when it comes to first responders, and you guys will relate to this, right? They got a guy. They got a guy, right? And what does that mean? Well, if I say, "Hey Jim, I need some wheels for my truck," Jim's gonna say, "I got a guy," right?
He does.
If I say, "Hey Mike, I need somebody to build a deck on my back patio," Mike's gonna tell me, "I got a guy." And so early on, what we had to do was become the guy for mental health and substance abuse treatment for first responders. And when we did that, right, along the way, that got us a lot of credit to begin with, right? So you look at the social aspect, you look at that, and so we have a lot of credit with them just walking through the door. And so cultural competency is something that we also teach. So you have a lot of clinicians that are extremely culturally competent over at TCTI and Dr. Odom and those sorts of things. And he's developed a whole course that is a mandatory training for all of our staff at First Responder Wellness to attend. And they go over all the ins and outs and all the stuff that is about first responder culture. Everything from how it is that these men and women are scheduled to work, what it is that they deal with at work, and how it is that we can better understand, everything up until their language, how it is that they talk to one another. So there's a difference between being competent in therapy, right, which all of our therapists and clinicians are. They're all highly trained, right? And then there's a difference in understanding the culture. And what is one of the quickest ways to understand any culture, in my opinion? Be immersed in it. Be immersed in that culture, right? And we're able to do that sheerly in the milieu of who it is that's there. So, cultural competency is a big thing. We understand that confidentiality is a huge piece to this, which builds the trust. They want to know, what's being said, where's it going, and who has access to this, and how it is that we're going to keep that information safe for them and confident for them, and who's involved in my treatment, and those sorts of things.
Chris, one of the things that I have watched you do, which is always amazing, is your ability to roll with resistance, your skill at not just talking to the clients one-on-one, but also the clients that are struggling, to stay there, the ones that are coming first in and want to turn and leave. Can you talk a little bit about this gift that you have of communication and listening and rolling with resistance?
Yeah. Well, I think, you bring up a really good point. In To be honest with you, it's the way that I approach it when I've got somebody there, and I think the biggest piece to that is transparency and speaking to them in a way that they can understand that, not only me, the person sitting across from them, not only do I understand how it is that they're feeling in those moments, but the entire staff understands. And the transparency is, helping them to understand that nobody wants to be in treatment, right? They sit down like, I don't want to be here. I can't do this. I can't do that. And I tell them all the time, listen, I don't know that anybody necessarily wants to be in treatment, especially when they first show up, right? And I start to help them understand that nobody's here, right? Including them. Nobody's here. Nobody's at this point because everything's going well in their life, right? Nobody's here because they didn't have anything else to do. Nobody's here because they had extra time on the books to burn. Nobody's here because it's in the 5 or the 10-year plan, right? Like check myself into a mental health facility. Like it's not there. You're here because of all the things in your life, the wheels are literally falling off. And so let's take a look at what that is for you, right? And just having those open and honest conversations with them, being able to validate how it is that they feel. Yeah, I get it. You're anxious, you're nervous, you're afraid, right? And that's really what it boils down to at the end of the day, which is something that's very difficult for them to understand. I also help them to understand that when it comes to what it is that they do for a living, right? And how it is that they view the world. It's about control, right? In a real remedial way to explain how the first responder brain works and when it comes to control. It's about, they show up, they assess, they gain, they manage and maintain control, right? You show up on a scene, you assess the scene, you immediately gain control, you manage and maintain control throughout, because lack of control in your world equals chaos and loss of life, right? And I've had this very conversation with so many of them, and they're sitting there kind of looking at me like you're looking at me now, like how is this applicable to what it is that I'm feeling? And so I explained to them that when you don't feel like you have control, your brain equivalates that to chaos and loss of life. I said, do you feel right now that things are, that there's a threat, that you feel fear and anxiety and all of these things? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. And so, well, because a lot of that has to do with you don't feel like you have control of every situation. In right now, you don't feel like you're in control of being in treatment and what it is that's being asked of you, right? And so, how do we help you to feel like, one, that you can trust that we have your best interest in mind, and two, how do we find some autonomy and some ways of you feeling like you have some control? And then they'll kind of look at me and be like, well, you're the professional. No, you tell me. And it's like, well, let's take a look at some of the things that you can control. What's your mind telling you right now? What's the story that you're telling yourself, right? And I really just start to help them understand what's happening within their mind, why it is that they feel like they can't be here. And, like most people in those situations, your mind is just full of shit, right? Pardon the language, but it's just lying. It's just telling you all of the things that, it wants you to believe so that you can get up and get out of wherever it is that you're at. And it certainly applies to mental health and addiction treatment. So I think the biggest piece in connecting with them is validating how that they're feeling, right? Um, Being open and honest with them. A lot of times when I first meet with the clients, I do my best to meet, a majority of the clients and try to just, talk to them a little bit one on one and those sorts of things. And I'll ask people like, hey, how do you best receive information? And they'll say, well, what do you mean? I say, well, is it better for somebody to just tell you what you need to hear and have you deal with it, right? In other words, don't sugarcoat it, just give you the information. Or do you need an easier, softer approach, right? Like, how do you best receive information? And they'll always tell me, just tell me that, just tell me. Just don't sugarcoat it, just tell me what's going on. And I'll say, okay. So remember that when I'm talking to you at some point later on. And it gives me a real good reference point to go, hey, Jim, you remember when we talked and I said, hey, how do you best receive information? And you said, just give it to me straight. And they'll look at me and they'll go,
Nice.
yeah. I'll say, have a seat. I'm about to give it to you straight. And I think they really appreciate that. They live and operate in a world that does not allow for them to process and uh, go through their emotions, right? They're onward and upward to the next deal, and so they don't have time for the BS. They need to be given the information so that they can formulate a solution to whatever's going on. And so a lot of times it's about that. It's about now that we have this rapport and that you can trust me, I'm just going to give it to you. I'm going to give you the information and listen, you're not going to have to walk through this alone. I'm going to walk through it with you. My team's going to walk through it with you. So understand that. But you're going to have to deal with those uncomfortable feelings. And here they are, right? You're telling me that you want to go home. Now's not the time to go home. I know you love your wife. I know you love your family, but you know who wants you to be here more than you? Your wife and your family, right? Like they don't want you home right now. You're a mess. Things are not going well. Communication's broken, right? And I really start to lay down all of the things that brought them there. And most of the time, again, it's like they understand, hey, you know what? This is uncomfortable, but it's the truth. I don't have to like it, but it's the truth. And so I think one of the biggest things, right, is validating their feelings, helping them to navigate the reality of what's going on, helping them to understand that their brain is not on their side right now, right? That it's going to tell them all the things that it's going to rationalize and justify everything it can to get them out of treatment and help build some rapport with them and help them to, get to trust us so that we can walk through these things together.
Chris, I have two follow-up questions for you. Number one is, generally speaking, and everyone's unique, when do you start seeing the shift? When
Yeah.
do you start seeing in the clients the, lack of a better term, the buy-in? And then the second piece is, what do you say to the emergency responders' wives or husbands or boyfriends or girlfriends when there's resistance and the client wants to leave? What do you say to them?
Yeah. Great questions, right? So when do we see the buy-in? So here's the piece, right? That is really the pinnacle to somebody being successful, right? Is like when they buy in, when they go all in, that's really when you start to see um, somebody gain momentum in treatment. And so, a lot of times what I explain to people when it comes to treatment in general, right? So if you look out at the treatment field, and we're in Orange County. We're in Southern Orange County. There's a traditional treatment center on every corner. Okay. And so the treatment industry is saturated with treatment centers. And I've worked at a handful of treatment centers. And typically what you get is you get a population of people, right? Where they're usually young, they don't want to be in treatment. Mom and dad are paying for treatment. They don't really have an interest in being in treatment. So you have about a milieu of about 90% of people that don't want to be there. And then you got about a 5%, you got 5% of people that are unsure if they want to be there. They're kind of on the fence. And then you got 5% of people that actually want to be there, right? They're actually motivated to do it. And that's your traditional treatment. So that milieu of 90% of people that don't want to be there are really kind of the deciding factor of the entirety of the facility, right? They don't want to be there. So that's the attitude in and amongst the majority of the people. Nobody really wants to be here. Well, people feed off people, and that just doesn't go well. And so back to this, right? When people come to first responder wellness, when first responders do anything, right? The majority of the time, they do it to the very best of their abilities. They are very goal-oriented people, right? They really want to come out on top. They want to shine. And so the milieu in itself is full of a lot of people who really want to be there. They really want to get well and do better. They want to improve the overall quality of their life. And so they've made a decision to come to first responder wellness to get help in doing that. And so that's a big piece of it, right? We help them to make connections within that milieu that are also going to support what it is that, they came there to do. So to your point, you got some people that are struggling, right? That maybe say, I don't want to be here, and you have a big milieu of people and they gather around, right? And they start saying, hey, you know what, Jim? We understand you don't want to be here. I felt that way too. I've been here for this amount of time. Here's what I notice. Here's what I'm doing. Here's where I bought into the program, you know. And I'll sit down with individuals like that and I'll just, again, it's kind of like getting them to a point of understanding where your life is currently, right? Like, where's your life currently? What got you here? Again, you're not here because everything's going well. Talk to me about what brought you here. I get it. You don't want to be here. That's fine. If at the end of this conversation, you decide that you still don't want to be here, guess what? You can go home. This isn't prison. There's not bars on the windows. There's not a guard at the door. This isn't a lockdown facility. Like, this is a volunteer thing. So let's talk about what it was that brought you here to begin with, right? And then we start taking down some of those barriers. And when you can start to, really get into and removing some of those barriers, at the end of it all, it's like, do you want to get better? Yeah. Well, if I had a way to offer you to help you get better, would you take it? Yeah. Well, guess what I have? I have a way to help you get better and I want to offer it. Like, really, really building a team with them too is something I think that's really important, and helping them to understand that, you know what, I'd love the opportunity to help you. My team and myself would love the opportunity and the privilege to really walk alongside you and get you, through whatever's going on. But you know what that requires? It requires your buy-in. None of this works if it's not something that you want to do. And so really helping people to understand that. One of the other pieces that I really work on them with is the language that they use, right? And so I talk to people all the time, and you guys are familiar with this stuff, the get tos versus the have tos, right? I talk to them about when you're telling yourself things like I have to be here, and I have to do this, you're working towards failure. You're gonna give up. Why? Why are you gonna give up? What do you do with anything that you have to do? You get resentful, you get fearful, you get angry, you get all these things. I have to do this. I have to, I have to go to work today. I have to talk to my wife. I have to do these things. Like, no, you don't. You get to do these things. And if we can start to shift that mindset, right? And we can start to see everything as an opportunity rather than an obligation, then you start to feel like you have some power in what's going on. You have some buy-in. And now you're a person who actually wants to be here. Well, now you're a person who actually wants to do the work and you're going to start to get the results. And when it comes to family members, I learned this really early on with adolescents. And one of the things that we do here at First Responder Wellness, was one of the things that I learned early on with adolescents. And so right when the right when the kids would get there the first day, right? Even before they would go home, I'd peel off to an office, and if the parents were there, great, I'd pull them in the office. Otherwise, I'd make a call and I'd say, listen, I'm going to tell you a few things, and here's what you need to know, right? When Johnny comes home this afternoon, or you come to visit, here's some of the things you're going to hear, right? I don't need to be here because all they do is talk about using drugs and alcohol. I don't need to be here because I'm learning how to do things that I would never learn before. I don't need to be here, fill in the blank, right? And so the parents would kind of scratch their head a little bit and they'd be puzzled and okay, I guess, right? And sure enough, Johnny would go home that day and he would say, Mom, I don't need to be here. All they do is talk about getting high and using drugs, and I'm learning more about drugs than I ever did, right? And so we learned that the client, right, is going to tell the family members everything that they want to hear to get them on their side to pull them out of treatment. And so one of the things that we've done at First Responder Wellness is develop a letter that goes out to the family members of like, here's what you can expect. Here's your top 10 excuses on why people don't want to be in mental health and substance abuse treatment, right? And so now the family members also have a kind of outline. And sure enough, and Mike knows this, right? They'll tell Mike, like, man, he said exactly what you guys said he was going to say.
Yep.
Almost word for word on the script that you sent over. And we really help family members to understand that, we are here on a team with you. And so if you can get on the team with us and understand that everything that we're doing is for the benefit of your loved one, your relationships, the quality of your living, right? If you can get on the team with us, then together we can help your loved one. And when you can explain to people what they're going to experience, when you can explain to people what they have seen over these prolonged periods of time, why they've seen it, and what they can expect from their loved ones, it really helps them to understand why it is that their loved ones are saying the things that they're saying. And ultimately, it boils down to the fact that they're uncomfortable. If it's substance use that they're dealing with, we've taken substances away. So there's their primary coping mechanism. Emotions are going to run higher at these points. And it's just a difficult process. One of the analogies, right? Because I learned through analogy, and so that's one of the ways that I counsel. One of the analogies that I use for family members and clients alike, I said, listen, imagine your recovery as like a storage unit or a garage, okay? And if I tell you, Jim, I'm going to clean out my garage today, and my garage is, it's a mess, right? Like I've got stuff stacked to the ceiling, and I tell Jim, hey Jim, I'm gonna go clean my garage out today, and Jim says, Roger that. And Jim comes by about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Jim, what do you think you're gonna see?
At 12 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yep. If I've told you, hey, I'm gonna clean out my garage, and you come by around lunchtime, what do you think you're gonna see?
Well, number one is I'm not sure if you'll follow up and actually clean the garage out, but if you do, it's probably going to be like a nightmare in there, and things are drug out and scattered all over the driveway, and
Yep.
absolutely.
That's exactly right. Okay, so imagine this is your recovery. You throw open that door, right? And I come in and Jim comes by around 12 o'clock. What's he gonna say? He's gonna say, bro, I thought you were cleaning this mess up. You got stuff strewn out all over the driveway, right? I got a pile of absolute garbage, what I know to be absolute trash over here. I've got a pile of like, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to keep it or not right here. I've got a pile of like, absolutely, I'm going to keep this. And over here, I got this pile of, oh my God, I completely forgot I even had this. I'm stoked, right? I'm so happy that I found this. I bought this 2 years ago and threw it out here and completely lost. Like I'm just ecstatic, right? And so recovery, I tell them, is very much the same way. In the beginning, it's going to be an absolute mess before we can get this stuff organized. They're going to have a pile of absolute stuff, trash that they just know does them no good. The alcohol, the drugs, the untreated mental health, right? Then they're gonna have this pile of things that they're struggling with to keep. Like, this works okay, but sometimes it doesn't. They're gonna have a pile of stuff that they absolutely know that they need, and along the way, they're gonna rediscover things about themselves. And the best part about all of that is nobody's going to do all of that with a smile on their face and just skipping along every day, right? Even if you go back to the analogy of cleaning out the garage, who's whistling, a great song and jamming out the good tunes? Like, no, you're probably like, this sucks. This absolutely sucks. This is work. I don't want to do it. It's a mess. Everything is disorganized. All I want is a clean garage. All I want is to be recovered, right? All I want is my life to be in order. But in order to do that, I got to go through everything that I have. So I use that a lot with them, and it seems to really kind of paint a picture for people about what this journey is going to be like, if
Well,
that makes sense.
it does. And Chris, and we know that you've got a good handle on your own personal recovery and dealing with people in recovery, as specifically first responders. Now, going back a little bit, we talk about cultural competency. And we all know in recovery it's a marathon, not a sprint. So people working in the field of recovery, therapists, case managers, you name it, doctors, we keep on improving ourselves to be better at what we do. And you recently had the opportunity to go out into the community and work with the Long Beach Fire Department on a 24-hour tour with them. And you want to bring us in a little bit about what that looked like, how that was for you, and what you learned.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so yeah, over the years, I've had the opportunity to do a few ride-alongs. I've done some with law enforcement, and I've done a couple with fire. But typically, those ride-alongs are, 6, maybe 8 hours. But I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to do a 24-hour ride along with Long Beach Fire over at Station 10s. And I tell you what, man, it was such an opportunity and such an honor to really, be alongside these guys while they were working all night. So I got there at about 8:30 and they were already out on a call. And so they arrived back after that call and I got introduced to uh, the captain there, Gary, I believe his last name's Shaw. I hope I'm saying that right, Gary. And great human, great individual. He kind of talked to me a little bit about what this was going to look like, what we were going to do, and introduced me to all the guys. And I jumped in shortly after that into the rescue with the couple of the medics. And we weren't gone 20 minutes before we were on the first call. And so, we run off. It's a I don't remember how old the guy was, but it was a non-response, right? The guy's not responding. And so they get there, and immediately for me, what I started to notice about how these men operated, right, was everything they did was with intent, right? And so I don't know if you guys are familiar with Long Beach at all, but Long Beach is, it's a really tight city. Everything from the alleyways to these apartment buildings, and the way that everything is kind of laid out. And I watched these guys navigate these apartment buildings with just precision. And they have these giant gurneys and all this equipment that they're having to carry up and down the elevator, right? And do these things. And everything that they're doing is just it's just with precision, right? And it's with an intent and an intensity while we're responding, like while we're going to somebody who's in, who's non-responsive, right? Who's like laid out and not responding. So we get there and they immediately start working this guy up. They're checking everything out, right? And I'm just kind of off to the side. And one of the medics says, "Hey, he's gonna arrest." And sure enough, full arrest. The guy goes bang. And these guys, again, you can feel the chaos in the air, but when you're watching them operate and do what they're doing, it's this beautiful dance of like everyone knows exactly what they're doing and where they're going without having to say a word. And so, another response team shows up to help them. They start working this guy up. Now there's probably 6 medics here. And again, everything that they're doing is just this beautiful move with intent. And um, they're just nobody's saying anything. It's funny because you watch the movies and everybody's screaming, "Give me this and give me that and get out of the way," and there was none of that. They're doing this every step of the way, and there's very little that they're even saying at this point in time, right? And this guy's dead, for lack of a better term, right? Like this he's gone, and they're working him up. They get the Lucas machine on him, and this thing's giving him compressions. They get him in the back of the rescue, and everybody knew where to go and what to do, right? So when we showed up, it was me and two other medics, and by the time we left, there was a rescue full of medics, and another guy was driving, and I was in the passenger seat, and we were on our way to the hospital. And this is the first call, right? Like this is the very first call. And so we get to the hospital, they get pulse on this guy, they and I'm watching them do everything, they're shouting out what's happening, chief complaint, all the stuff is just coming out, and they're getting him over to the doctors and the nurses, and they get him over on another gurney, and he's got a pulse, and now they're wrapping it up, they're cleaning up the gurney. One of the guys is starting to, do his reports, and they're getting ready to go to the next call. And so we did this. Um, we ran 20 calls, and I was fortunate enough to be on every single one of those calls. And what it showed me was I was so impressed by one, their ability to be able to manage the chaos, whatever the call was. So we had two full arrests, we had a couple of traffic accidents, we had a couple people hit by cars. Um, it just their ability to be able to manage everything all at one time there because there's so much going on with these guys. Whether it's having to deal with the public, whether it's having to deal with the actual patient themselves and their traumas or whatever's going on, their ability and their professionalism was it. I was just blown away. There were points during, like I said, we ran 20 calls. There were points during the 20 calls where I was losing my patience with some of the stuff that was going on, right? And I'm not, I'm just there basically in their back pocket, right? And there were a couple of times there was stuff going on, and there, hey, can you grab me this and run down and grab that? And I was like, heck yeah, man, So I'm grabbing oxygen tanks and doing stuff to help them out, and I'm losing patience with some of these people, right? Like, and I never once saw that with them. So that was extremely impressive, because there were a few of those calls that were just BS calls, but they handled them beautifully, you know. And there was just a way about what they were doing that really opened my eyes to a different experience, right?
Mhm.
I've been working with these men and women for, 7 years now. I've been on a handful of ride-alongs. This was different, I think, because one, because just the sheer volume of what we were doing, right? Like 20 calls, that's a lot of calls. Um, just the sheer volume, but two, I was actually able to like put my hands on,
Mhm.
so to speak, right? The experiences. I'm there firsthand, and I'm watching everything that they're doing and how it is that they're doing it. And um, what's expected of them, I think, was the biggest piece where, again, they were just extremely professional in every aspect, right? And at the end of it all, right? Like I think what really stood out to me is what it is that we expect of these men and women. I think we expect so much from them in the ways of like we ran calls from 8:30, quarter to 9 that morning until 3:30 the next morning. And from 3:30 to around 5, I think, they actually got to that we didn't get any calls, the tones didn't go off. And then at 5 o'clock it started right back up, right? And they're right back out there. And so the sheer volume of what it is that they're having to deal with, and again, some of these were serious calls, right? Like two people were flatlined, they were gone, they were full arrest, and they brought them back. There was a woman hit by a car, she was pretty banged up, and so just the sheer volume of what it is that they had to deal with and how much we expect out of them. Like I said, they ran those calls, and somewhere around 3:30, if you were lucky enough to fall asleep, I had a hard time falling asleep because I was just waiting for those tones to go off. You know, it's like you're laying there in anticipation of like, I want to kind of go to sleep, but is that thing going to go off again? And you know, for them, is it still like that? I don't know. But we ran these calls, you know, and then it dawned on me, which I've known for a long time because I get to deal with them. I was getting ready to go home. I was getting ready to, you know, I had packed up my little bag and I was shaking hands and thanking them for the experience. I was getting ready to go home and I wasn't going to have to do that again. But there was a bunch of them that were going on to the next shift and they were going to have to start a day like that all over. There were some of them that had been on, you know, a couple of days worth of shifts like that and they were getting ready to go home. And so this idea, you know, that now they have to go home, they have to be husbands, they have to be fathers, they have to, you know, take care of these responsibilities. You know, a lot of them are married and they have families, and it's like, you know, the wife has been taking care of all of this stuff since they've been at work for these 2 or 3 days, right? And now they got to go home and you know, the wife's like, I need you to do this and I need you to do that. One of the guys is getting ready to, you know, drive to his kid's you know, soccer game, and I'm thinking, man, I'm exhausted and I know you guys are exhausted, but here he goes. He's got to go be a dad. You know, he's got to go operate out there in the world as a family member, um, on, you know, 2 hours of sleep. And that was just that day. I don't know what kind of shifts they had prior to that, you know. So I don't think most people, and I'm a person who's been in the first responder world, quote unquote, for 7 years. And I've heard the stories and I've heard, you know, one of the biggest pieces, the mandatory overtimes and those sorts of things that really weigh on them. And I've known that, right? Like logically, I knew that. And I could empathize with them at any point during their time with us. But I think what that did for me was really put me into a position to feel what was happening and
Yeah.
to really feel like people don't understand. Like you're the general public, myself included, and I'm a professional who's worked with them. And so I had some understanding. We really don't understand what is expected of these men and women on a day-to-day basis in how much the system is just flawed in how it is that they have to work. You know, forced overtimes and mandatory overtimes, like the just the sheer amount of hours that they're having to work, you know, and then on top of the amount of time that they have to work, the things that they're having to deal with. You know, they're showing up on somebody's worst day
Yeah.
several times a day. You know, the average person may never call 911, but if they do, it's probably like one time in their life. These guys are running 911 calls 20 times a day, you know, and then they got to go out into the world and be fathers and mothers and husbands and wives and, you know, brothers and sisters and just all of that stuff. So I think it really put into perspective the toll that this would have on one's mental health.
Yeah.
You know, there's just no way we can continue to ask a human being to do these things and not expect that it's gonna have some toll on them.
Right. Chris, you nailed a bunch of things as you were talking. You experienced the acute emergency tones. Just, hey, this is kind of my first experience sitting through this. And I'm really stunned and stoked that you slept with them. You stayed the 24-hour shift.
Yeah,
Most people leave after a couple of hours, they do their thing and they go, right?
yeah,
You got to experience what they experienced, but from a chronic level, the chronic tones that go off. And thank God the tones have changed through the years. Remember that TV show Emergency back in the day? You had that
yeah. All
loud
loud. Yeah,
klaxon going off. I mean, imagine waking up to that in the middle of the night over
right.
and over again. So thankfully the tones have mellowed out and the voices come in now that are
Yeah,
soft, right? So you experienced what they're going through, the chronic tones, the chronic insomnia. Wake up, I'm up all night. I'm up all night trying to get my mind wrapped around saving someone's life. What are you doing right now? I'm sound asleep. The tones go off. What am I rolling on? I need to get my head wrapped around getting dressed. What am I going to do when I get there? What's the scene size up going to look like? Like all the things you were talking about, the radio work and the hospital work, and then go back to the station again to wash, rinse, and repeat and do it all over again. And like, can you imagine that? And the audience, can you imagine that? I'm sleeping from 3 to 5. That's all I get,
Yeah.
and I'm up all night in a busy city. The chronic insomnia, the chronic empathy overload, like you mentioned it, Chris, they give their heart. They knew the job was dangerous when they took it. Did they? Did they really? Did they know all these pieces, right? When they came on board, I have this job and I have to put on a new face every client,
Yeah.
even the one that's calling 911, the homeless person that's a repetitive caller,
Yeah.
or the person that's fallen down and they need help to get out of their off the floor. Those kinds of chronic empathy overload. And what do you do? Like you were talking, Chris, they're going home now.
Yeah.
What is left for them when they go home? They're at their wits' end. There's nothing left in the empathy compartment anymore. Yet still, I got to be a mom. I got to be a dad. I got to be a family member. I've got responsibilities. When all their body is screaming for is, kind of just lay down and take a time out for a little bit, how it affects their personal life. You touched on it, Chris, the overtime, the mandatory shifts, work on the holidays. So much is expected of our emergency responders that is just over the top.
Yeah. Yeah, and it really brought into perspective, the compassion fatigue. It's like, and you just brought that up. It's like, and they were very compassionate and empathetic, you know, um, to every single one of the people that they ran a call on, right? And compassion and empathetic to a certain degree, right? Like to your point, Jim, like there were some knucklehead calls, there was some repeat offenders, right? There was. I mean, we ran on one guy who had a supposed cocaine overdose, and we show up and he's screaming about how his heart's pounding out of his chest, and I kind of looked down at him and I go, "This is the first time you've done cocaine?" And he says, "No." And I said, "So you know that when you do cocaine, your heart's going to pound out of your chest?" And it was like, and one of the guys said to him, "The hospital's right there. You could have walked to the hospital. You just did a bunch of coke. You could have walked there." Right. But even in that way, like they were being compassionate. They didn't just look at this guy and start, you know, calling him names or talking bad to him, right? They were giving him a little bit of love around, a little rough around the edges, but at the same time, it was like there was still compassion with him, right? Like they didn't do anything out of pocket, right? They put him on the gurney, they treated him, they talked to him along the way. They made sure that he was okay. And then we get to the hospital and everybody knew this guy. All the nurses were like, "Oh my God." And they start calling his name, you know what I mean? And they're like, "Him again?" And they're like, "Yeah, he does this." But they even had compassion with him, and it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, screw this guy, dude. You know what I mean? Like, he just woke everybody up in the middle of the night because his heart's pounding out of his chest. Well, no shit, dummy. You just did a bunch of coke. And it's like, and I start asking him, "Hey, what did you mix that with?" "Well, and I'm like, and no wonder you're feeling that way, dude. And we ran a few more calls and brought a few more people to the hospital, and that guy was in a hospital bed, sitting on his phone, and it's like, and they were not judgmental, with any of these people in that, Long Beach is a very uh, less fortunate city in a lot of areas. And they were not judgmental at all. I don't think I heard them say one cross thing or one, poorly placed joke or anything about anybody's situation. And I know that kind of stuff happens, and I understand it. But I imagined then, on my way home, I'm thinking, I didn't have to put out as much at all, right, when it came to compassion and empathy as these men and women did, and I'm gonna get to go home and get a couple hours of sleep, and my wife is gonna be like, "Hey, that was cool," and these men and women are gonna have to go home and like find some more empathy and find some more compassion for the people that they love, and I would have to imagine that they're dried up, man. There's
Yeah,
little compassion and little empathy, and you add in the lack of sleep on top of that, and who doesn't get cranky when they don't have sleep? Who doesn't
right.
who's not, full of empathy and
Yeah,
compassion when they don't have a lot of sleep? I mean, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. It was like, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
all of it, the entire time. And it's like they're operating on such, and again, I think I was just blown away at their ability to be able to treat some of these people who are in serious situations, and they just did it, man. And they just bang, 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 and they did what they needed to do. They got them to the hospital, clean that gurney off, put that thing in, start typing in the info that they need to type in, and let's get to the next one. And so it was just, and it opened my eyes to the whole system too, right? Like, we ran 20 calls, and I think 17 out of those 20 calls went to the hospital. So it's like they're dropping these people off to the hospital who now has to deal with them, right? And so the whole system in itself, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I think is really, really needs an overhaul. But
right,
yeah,
right. And the other piece to that, real quickly, can you imagine all this and you added the whole COVID thing on top of it back in 2020?
yeah,
Unbelievable.
and that I we first responder wellness, we were fortunate enough to be open during that time, and we actually, it was one of the things that drove our census up. And I'm so glad that we were able to be open during that time so that these people had a place to go.
Mhm.
Because you bring up another piece, while I was there, those Palisade fires were burning, and these guys, there was just kind of this underlying tone or feel of like, a lot of those guys wanted to be up there and they wanted to be putting in the work. And, you know, there's a lot of political stuff that comes with these jobs, I think. And that plays a huge toll on them as well. Um, Psychologically, I think the bureaucracy and the things that come with having to deal with politics and them being able to do their job plays a big part in a lot of the stress. And especially I think as you go upward into those higher administrative positions, I think that gets even more difficult. The other thing that I will say about the station that I was at, I think the leadership there was probably, I hope that it is the standard, but I don't know that it is, only because I've dealt with so many first responders that literally have, PTS as a result of the administration and the places that, and the management that they're working for.
Right.
But the way that Gary was with these guys, it was apparent that everybody respected him. The captain, they respected him, they respected his leadership. He cared deeply for these men. Um, and I would imagine that, there weren't any women working there, but I would imagine that's across the board with him. And that, I think, provided a big part of my experience as well. I did not see a lot of, jockeying for positions, or talking badly to each other or any of that stuff. And I think that was a direct result of their leadership in how it is that he treats his firefighters and his paramedics, and how it is that he um, trains them. And it's apparent that he was a really good teacher. I was able to hear a few conversations with him and how he was teaching them on some things. He's a very knowledgeable person. But I think the leadership piece plays such a big part in their mental health as well, right? Poor leadership on top of an already stressful job, and already, lack of sleep, lack of nutrition at times, you know what I mean? Just the sheer hours. And then you have to deal with poor management or poor leadership. I don't think that is going to benefit anybody. And I think the other piece that I saw to this was that with good leadership, these guys can perform well at the jobs that they're doing and not have that as a overlooming, you know, barrier to more, mental health challenges or addiction challenges, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I love how you talk about the leadership. Good and bad leadership leads down different roads, just like going into treatment or getting help. The stigma of getting help for first responders. It's huge when you are able to hear from others that have gone through it, that know what recovery really is, to listen to what you're talking about, Chris, that it's okay to get help. And I know that some of us are listening and we're probably thinking, okay, well, I've gone too far. I've gone too far to change. I'm too old, about ready to retire. I'm hesitant about getting help. I'm struggling inside, but the stigma does seem a little bit thick. What would you say to those people? And how can our community, our first responder community, work better to support mental health and recovery amongst us?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think a lot of it starts right at the base of how we're treating each other. And, again, with these guys, I watched was a real brotherhood and they really looked out for one another. The way that they talked to one another, it really was a huge part of the experience. And I think it's a definite help to each other, right? Let's take a look at how we're looking at each other and how we're treating each other first and foremost, right? And if you're somebody who's saying to yourself, I've been struggling and I think that, that it's time that I do something and I need to get some help. One of the big pieces that I try to get across to these men and women is at what cost, right? At what cost? At what cost are you going to continue to put one foot in front of the other and show up at that station or that department, knowing that you're struggling? At what cost? Because ultimately it's the cost of your life or someone else's life. So many times they struggle in silence when they don't have to. There's people out here that are willing to help you, but you got to ask for help. Where do you start? I mean, I think sometimes it's just as easy as finding that peer support person in your department, you know, and starting to talk with them. Reach out to a therapist, start at the low level if you feel like you have to. Just start talking. Find those people in your circle that you can talk to. If you're struggling, you know that there's other people struggling, you know? Being honest is the only way to fix this. We can't continue to lie to ourselves and lie to those around us and say that we're okay when we're not. How is it that you would expect to be okay given what it is that you deal with on a day-to-day basis? Right? The sheer volume in which you deal with things and then the things that you deal with, time, duress, stress, and pressure. You put anything underneath those four things and something's going to give. The finest piece of machinery, the finest sports cars, the finest watches at all at some point need to be recalibrated. And I believe that the human mind is the finest machine on the face of this planet. It probably needs to be recalibrated. So let's do that. Let's look at things in a different light. You're not broken. You're not less than. You haven't failed. People oftentimes say, well, I feel like I failed. I say, well, if you know that there's something wrong, if you know that there's something wrong with your car, you can hear it, but yet you keep driving, then you failed. Now the problem is going to be bigger than it needed to be. You only fail when you stop trying. Reach out for that help, man. There's nothing that says you're broken, you're less than, right? Everybody needs help at some point in time. How many people have you helped? How many people have you helped? How many people will you continue to help? If you had a friend, a family member that said, "Hey man, I'm struggling with alcoholism or I'm struggling with mental health stuff," would you think less of them or would you help them? You'd help them. So let us help you. Let those people around you help you. I get it. There's a stigma behind it. Well, where does the stigma come from? The bigger piece of the stigma is coming from inside you. The bigger piece is like what you are saying about you. It's not what everybody else is saying. You're the one that's saying, right? You will never be defeated by what they say about you, and you will only be defeated by what you say about you, right? You're the one saying, I'm weak, I'm less than, I'm this, I'm that, I failed. No, you haven't. You haven't failed. Pick up the phone. Let's get you some help. Let's get you where you want to be. You know, um, I manage my recovery every single day, and 19 years, God willing, in February, and I can tell you that it is a day to day dealing, right? Like and it's not a struggle. I don't struggle with addiction anymore. I don't struggle with mental health anymore, right? Like I'm not cured. I can't drink. I know that. Um, but it's not a struggle. And I want people to understand that. The beginnings of my recovery was an absolute struggle, but I don't struggle today. And I think you guys can attest to this in your own lives. You've got a plan and a foundation that you operate from, and your life is much better as a result of operating from that foundation and implementing those things daily into your life. Listen, there's people out there that can help anybody who's struggling do those same things. Let's get you in, let's get you a plan, let's help you build a foundation so that you don't have to keep struggling, you know?
Chris, you working at First Responder Wellness, which again is only for first responders, treatment and recovery, mental health for emergency responders only. What can a client expect coming there day one? And what are the different programs, counseling genres that you provide, that you offer your clients at First Responder Wellness?
Yeah. That's a great question. It's it starts with picking up that phone, right? And just like anything else, we've got to get an assessment. We've got to figure out what's going on, right? Same thing that you guys do day in and day out. You show up, you start assessing the situation to see what we're dealing with. So that's the first step. Once you complete that assessment with an admissions counselor, they start to determine what the best course of action is, and we look at things from that point on. We offer a full continuum of care, which means we do everything from detox to mental health stabilization to outpatient treatment to residential treatment. We offer supportive housing for those who need it. And you can expect to get, seen by a therapist a couple of times a week. You get a case manager who's going to be there. You get multiple groups a day. We do a therapy. A lot of people are familiar with EMDR, and we went the route of ART, which is accelerated resolution therapy. And we did that because it's a much quicker way to kind of get in and cut sling on a bunch of those traumas. So we can have somebody sit down with you and start that modality of therapy, which is it's a very interesting modality in the ways of like being able to get in there and process these traumas. And what it does is it really changes your relationship and your emotional attachment to these um, traumas so that when they pop up again, like you just don't have the same emotional reaction that you once did to them. So let's say anxiety and fear was kind of felt at an 8 or a 9 every time you recalled this call that you had. They can get in there and through bilateral hand and eye movement, they can get in there and help you really change the relationship with that. Um, and when that memory pops up again, those anxieties are down to a 2 and a 3, and they just don't hang around the way that they once did. and we found a lot of success in that. We're starting to utilize the SGB, which is the stellate ganglion block, which is a small injection into the ganglion nerve bundle here, in which is part of the sympathetic nerves, where a lot of first responders get stuck in that fight or flight feeling. And so this outpatient procedure is a way to really get those things to start to relax. And that, coupled with the group therapies and the ART, we're finding really good success with our clients in being able to go back to work or return back to a better quality of living. Some people are retired and they're not going back to work. Some are moving on from the first responder world, and some are returning back to work. And so we've been able to do that. Day one, you can expect to meet Mike or myself, and really start to get introduced to a daily, schedule of what it is that we're going to do and how it is that we're going to attack this thing. We're going to sit down with somebody and begin to develop a treatment plan that's going to carry them out through their entire episode of treatment. And it's a real collaborative thing. It's not like you're going to sit down with a therapist who's going to come up with a plan and say, okay, here, Jim, this is what you're going to do. It's Jim offering information and saying, hey, this is where I'm challenged. This is what I would like to do. And the therapist saying, hey, I feel like this is where we could go with that. And here's what my suggestions would be. And they come up with this collaborative plan. We run a family program about every 6 weeks that we're able to really bring the families together and help them to address the things that they need to address, help them to understand what it is that they've been dealing with and how it is that their loved ones have been affected by the job that they love so much. We validate what the family members have experienced, because our first responders aren't in this alone, right? We know that if somebody's dealing with untreated mental health, substance abuse, post-traumatic stress, they have a family around them that's also been dealing with all of the symptoms that come with that. And so we're able to validate the family and help them to understand the process in which that we can help, everybody get to the position that they want to get to, right? Which is a better quality of life. Mike is a big part of that family program. I think it's one of the things that we do really well, because we understand that if we're going to take somebody out of that environment and return them back to that environment, we've got to help to begin to change that environment. We can't just return them to the same things that they left from. We're going to help them build a discharge plan that's really going to help them continue their aftercare when they're done with us. So, we're really going to set these men and women up for success. And, it's an honor and a privilege every single time I get to sit down with somebody and help them to, put their best foot forward and hopefully get on that road to recovery. Much like what you guys do as first responders out there, saving lives and helping people to get through their hardest days. It's something that myself and my team do as well. And, it's there's such a reward for me at the end of the day when, I get that email or that text message or that card that says, hey man, X amount of days out of treatment, or I'm a year sober, or, I can't thank you guys enough because, I'm back to work and I've never been able to, have the relationships that I have. I mean, just all the things that come with recovery. And those are the things that keep you going. It's a difficult field to work in. Unfortunately, not everybody is successful when they enter into the world of recovery. And so we deal with that as well. But, at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that come to first responder wellness and they are a lot better off because of it. And getting to do that with these men and women, it just, I know myself and my team, it's just a privilege. It really is.
Chris, if a listener wants to reach out or a family member wants to reach out to First Responder Wellness, what's the ways they can get a hold of you guys?
We have a great website, Google First Responder Wellness, and the website will pop up there. There'll be a number there for the admissions line. So go ahead and grab that number and you'll get an admissions counselor. You can also reach out directly to me, 714-658-8548. I'd be glad to navigate that with you and help you get hooked up with an admissions counselor. Um, and then from there, we'll just, again, we go through those assessments and we figure out what we can do and how it is that we can help.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. This has been a great talk. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us. I know you've brought enlightenment and courage to those that are actually out there thinking about getting help and not knowing what to do. And I think you've eased their fears a little bit. It's been a pleasure and an honor having you, man. And it's an honor working with you too, every single day, doing what we're doing. It's just been amazing, and I love it.
Right on, man. I appreciate it. And it goes back to you. I appreciate you guys having me, on here and hopefully something that I said is going to be beneficial to some people out there. Um, I'm blessed to be working with you as well, Mike, and be doing what it is that we're doing. It's an honor and a privilege to know the both of you, Jim. It's always good to connect, reconnect with people. It's been a minute since I seen your face, so it's good to see you, man. And yeah, let's just keep doing what we're doing. These men and women sacrifice so much, um, and I think they deserve so much more in the ways of how it is that we care for them and what it is that we do moving forward. I'm really hoping that this is just the beginning of a big shift in how it is that people, our emergency responders get help uh, because they help so much, and they deserve so much more from us. They really do. If you're a civilian out there listening to this, do me a favor and thank a firefighter, thank a police officer, because believe me, they deserve much more than that. I'd love the opportunity to come back and kind of talk with you guys a little bit more. I'm hoping to do some more ride-alongs, maybe with PD, and I think it's worth talking about. Uh, I know we focused a lot on EMS, but I think it's worth talking a lot about, what it is that our law enforcement officers go through as well, because, all these firefighters out here are looked at as heroes, and our police officers are always looked at as the bad guys, and I think we need to start helping the public understand that, a big percentage of law enforcement,
Yeah.
they're doing such a good job out there. They really are, and they get such a bad rap.
Most definitely, Chris. Let's get you back on the show again and again. I think there's a lot more information we can get out there.
Yep. You guys let me know. Let's do it.
That man right there, that's Chris Logan, Director of Operations at First Responder Wellness in Newport Beach, California. His position focuses exclusively on education, counseling interventions, and he is a co-facilitator of the First Responder Family Program. Chris also oversees the day-to-day operations of the program. He served as program supervisor, and he is a certified alcohol and drug counselor, CADC-II. He's also worked with adolescents, adults, military veterans, first responders, and families, and he's held positions as case manager, counselor, crisis interventionist, and residential program manager. Chris has battled his own alcoholism and addiction, now fully in 19 years of sobriety. Congratulations, Chris. He became sober back in February 2006. Seeing the benefits of his own recovery and a new outlook on life, he began helping others find themselves and see there is truly a better way to live. Since entering the field of addiction counseling in 2008, Chris furthered his education as a certified drug and alcohol counselor, certified first responder associate counselor, and has become an invaluable member of the First Responder Wellness Team in Newport Beach. Their website, firstresponder-wellness.com. Once again, firstresponder-wellness.com. You can reach First Responder Wellness directly at 888-443-4898. Again, 888-443-4898. Or if you want to talk to Chris directly, his confidential cell phone is 714-658-8548. Again, 714-658-8548. And this information will be in our show notes.
Right on, man. Chris, I will see you next week in person. Jim, it's been a pleasure as always. And remember, everybody out there listening, and Chris mentioned it too, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. When you're frustrated, when life is just like got you down and you don't know what to do, you're out of sorts, remember, halt and call for backup.
And don't get fooled again.